building and focusing on building and sustaining an anti-racist arts organization. We have three lovely panelists that are going to be joining us in conversation, leading the discussion. And we have our fearless leader, Brittany Caprice, who will be facilitating the conversation. We are asking that all questions be held until the end. And we look forward to hearing your questions so that we can all learn more about this topic and how we can all be a part of the growth. And to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my fearless leader, Brittany.
Hi, thank you, Jasmine. And I'm so excited for you all to be meeting Jasmine, who's going to be running this series. So you'll see me on this session, but Jasmine will be leading the rest of the sessions with the co-facilitators that we've got. And you'll see behind Jasmine is like the list of workshops we've got for the rest of the session, which is amazing. So yeah, it's so good to have you all here today. I think if anyone wants to turn their camera on, they are very welcome to do that. It makes it definitely feel more like we are in the space together and not sort of on this technology. So we would love to see your faces. And, you know, we all know that there's a ton of stuff going on in the background. So like, that's fine. You know, we don't mind seeing your cat butts, which is like what I feel like we've been doing a lot of this time of year, or like your kids bouncing in and out of the screen. Like, this is life. And one of the amazing things about this time is that, you know, we're in each other's homes. So please do feel free to turn on your screen. And if you need to like also make dinner or whatever, we're here for that. So I just want to welcome you all to this amazing panel conversation, Building and Sustaining Anti-Racist Arts Organizations. As Jasmine said, I'm Britt Campese, the principal of Vision Driven Consulting. And I am really particularly interested in this conversation with these three folks because all of them are artists, all of them are also activists and supporters of the arts and organizers and leaders in this work in Philadelphia. And I think really knowing that the work that you all do is just, it's not just a job and it's not just with your organizations, it's literally the ways in which you all embody moving through time and space. And so like, this is just thrilling for me to be able to connect with all three of you. And so I would love to introduce you all. I know that we gave sort of brief introductions in the beginning, and I will pass it off to you all again, but I just want to welcome you each individually, not through reading what's on your websites, but just through my relationships with each of you. And so Lanish Miller-White, I am just amazed at the work that you do in co-founding Theater in the X. So like both working as an artist and as an advocate for artists and as an advocate for audiences is just amazing, and bring your whole self, both as a person, as an artist, as a mom, as a Black woman, like the writing that you do about parenting, like this is all part of what makes me really appreciate you as a person, and the way that you really center representation in all of the work that you do as, you know, a producer and an artist and a parent. And now you're the executive director of Theater Philadelphia, which is really badass. And I'm so happy that you are in that position, really making amazing shifts at every level of organizing with artists in Philly. So thank you. I'm happy you're here. And Kristal Sotomayor, who is was a former staff person at Vision Driven Artists. So like I have like this deep personal love. And I just like am watching all of this amazing work that you have been doing over the past few years as a filmmaker, like coming into your own, and then also like lifting up and bringing along other filmmakers, particularly Latinx filmmakers with you. Like there is nothing more profound than bring your friends and colleagues with you as you come into your own, as you begin acquiring more and more resources. So co-founding Presente Media is like such an amazing example of that, like being an artist, but also knowing that you want to be around another collective of artists, and being the programming director of the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival. Like, you're winning awards left and right, and it's so amazing, and I really appreciate you. So I'm happy.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Samantha Rise, co-director of Girls Rock Philly with Mel and Candy. So happy you're here. We haven't actually met in person, which is amazing, but I was cycling off the GRP board right as you were moving into a leadership role. And I will say that what we dreamed up as the board of directors was nothing close to what happened when you came in. Like, you built this team that was beyond our wildest dreams. You like co-built this amazing team of 3 co-directors, which is an organizational structure that as a consultant, I'm always like telling other people to look at. And I know that it's taken so much hard work for you all, but the amount of communication and love that you have for each other shows in the way you all show up for each other, and have shifted the work and the organization. So I really appreciate that. And then just your leadership in these streets through these marches and organizing movement work. Like, you are living and breathing all of this beyond the walls of these institutions. So I'm so glad you're here. And now I would love for you all to share with us. I'm going to put in the chat the questions I'm going to ask so that people can see them visually. And also, I forgot to tell you that there's a live closed caption transcript that is at the bottom. And if you don't want to see that, you can click on live transcript and hide it, but we definitely have closed caption available. So I'm going to ask Lanish, will you tell us more about yourself and your organization? So, like, all of you are wearing different hats, and I just rattled off random things, but you all can tell the group more about yourself in your own words.
Sure. So one hat, I am executive director of Theater Philadelphia, which is an umbrella organization for theater in the region. And then I'm also executive director of Theater in the X, which is an organization created to provide access to theater for Black audiences, as well as provide opportunities for artists of color. Those are kind of my 2 main hats. I also worked at the Paint and Bright Art Center for 14 years, and I'm sure I'll have examples from that time in here as well. And I'm also an actor.
Oh yeah, that other thing.
Yeah, every once in a while.
You're right. Thanks, Lanish. And Kristal, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my work all revolves around film, in particular documentary and like Latino cinema. So yeah, I'm the programming director for the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival. This has been our 10th anniversary this year. Next year will be 11 years. So it's very exciting. And I've been with them doing programming for like the past like 3 years, I would say. And then before that, I was a volunteer for 2 years. So I've been with them for like 5 years. So a lot of time. And we really focus on celebrating like Latinidad and Latinx culture across the globe. So really for us, it's really important to talk about representation and what we want to see in Latinidad, things that are often not seen when you go to like Telemundo or Univision, or honestly, Google search Latinx, right? So we're really trying to change the conversation around what is Latinidad and who represents that. So every year we have kind of a theme that we think is really important in the community that we try to highlight. And this past year was like women and all, whoever encompasses womanhood and femininity and whatever you want to describe it as. And it was a really beautiful like moment to really like celebrate like womanhood. I just think that that's been so important, given like the feminicides that were happening in like Latin America, and even the issues that were happening with trans women in this country. I think it's so important to really like center them this past year. So that was really beautiful. And, you know, it's work that we've been doing for several years. And then, you know, during the pandemic, I co-founded Presente Media with two other like local Latinx filmmakers, because there was just a lack of information in the Latino community about what was happening with COVID. But also for years, there has just been like a lack of knowledge, of that knowledge being passed to us in a way that was culturally available for us, whether it's like having it in Spanish or having it bilingual, or, you know, just making sure that that has, like, we are the target audience, because we're usually not. So we write different articles and we produce like videos that are all like journalistic and informative for the community. And yeah, I most recently work at the International Documentary Association doing their awards, and that is like really different from the other work that I'm doing, because all my other work is very centered on like Latinidad and really changing what representation can look like. And so then what does it mean to go to an organization that hasn't had that representation in the past, and you're honestly it. So I think that's also part of the conversation that we can have too.
Thank you, for sure. We will definitely get into that. Thanks. And Sam.
Whew. Just like deep bows and gratitude to be in. I just love to be contextualized in Philadelphia art, in Philadelphia organizing, the Philadelphia energy of like the world we know is possible. And the fact that like y'all in your positions of leadership are also just so obviously boots on the ground, like making things happen. It's like such a unique spirit. I feel so grateful to be on this panel and like part of this community. So grounding myself here in Philadelphia and in the work that's happening here. I'm Sam Rise. I'm a trans non-binary weirdo. I am a Philly, I'm a transplant. I'm hopeful someday Philly will claim me. Like, may I endeavor to deserve y'all. Gratefully, I am, I'm one of 3 co-directors, as Britt mentioned, at Girls Rock Philly, for music mentoring org for girls and women and trans and gender expansive youth and adults. We believe that music is your birthright, and musical excellence is not our goal. We want to amplify and empower one another and use music as a tool for transformative justice, for prefiguring the world we want, right? It's to quote Angela Davis, our work against violence must be done with joy and art and song to prefigure the world we want. Like, that's what I'm signed up for. So I feel like we're all we're in the right room. I'm kind of in my 4th season with GRP when I'm rounding the corner. We're actually also in a process of changing our name, just acknowledging that our work and our practices are, then the solutions that we want to activate for our world are trans in their identities. And so like building transness into the word that we use to name ourselves, and also to invite more of our community to just believe in that expansion is what's lighting me up right now at GRP and our work together making music. I'm also a performing artist and have worked really hard in my my songwriting, and also mostly in live shows to remember community, remember audiences to their own capacity to sing and to use art and music as their own healing, that we're affecting and shaping and influencing one another beyond performance and consumer or audience member, but actually that music is the work that reconnects, and as is like any other artistic practice, it happens to be the medium that I'm most connected to. So the same work that I get to offer as an administrator at GRP is the work that I love to offer as a performing artist, and kind of illuminating the paths to participation that we have and access. And I'd say then that, lastly, gratefully, I think because I'm a transplant to Philadelphia, so much of my aspiration of like wanting to belong to Philadelphia is then acknowledging histories of displacement, histories of injustice, noticing who's with me, noticing who's not, and kind of reconciling both privilege and also experiences of oppression in myself, that I might be able to bridge gaps and also create access and balance in this community that I love so much. I'm unwilling to accept anything less. I believe that the leadership, the radical leadership for reimagining the world, like exists here in Philly. It is our artist communities and organizing communities. So I want to be in service to the song, whether it's like my own music, the organization, or the work that's happening in the streets here. It's just a real delight. I'm a rambler and a bird walker, so feel free, Britt or anyone else, to like wrap me up as we need to.
No, you're good. You're good. Thanks so much. And it is so, I will just say, it is so weird to be doing these things on the computer sometimes, because it's like, are people tuned in? Are they not? No. So I'm with you all. And I am hoping that this can be more of a conversation. So like, I'm happy to moderate in the sense of asking the question and maybe asking someone to kick it off. But Sam, Lanish, and Kristal, if the three of you are interested in just unmuting yourselves and responding to each other, it's super open. I like know you all are super respectful humans, so I'm not concerned at all about like how, jumping in at the wrong time. Technology is weird in that sense, but this can also be a conversation. So I'll kick it off with a question, and then I'll pass the question to Sam to start. And then Lanish or Kristal, if either of you want to sort of pick it up after that, we can try that and sort of move through our questions and have this conversation. And then just for sort of process sake, maybe around 7, we'll take a bio break, and then we can see what questions folks in the room have and talk about whether or not we want to continue our line of questioning or open it up to folks in the room to ask questions. So if you are on the line, you do have a question, just jot it down and we will make time and space for that. But we will ask a few targeted questions first. And so the first question that I would love to ask you all is super loaded because it's the name of the game. It's the name of the workshop. So clearly there was like some intention behind it. But I want to know, what does it mean to you when we say anti-racist arts organization? So we're hearing so much of this jargon and so many people have access to the language, but what does it actually look like or sound like or feel like when an organization is an anti-racist or not an anti-racist arts organization? So like, I'll just toss that out there. Sam, if you want to start.
Whew. I feel like first up, and it's the meatiest, it's the marrow, right? That's the marrow of the work. So be gentle with me, y'all. I will do my best. I'm also an external processor, so I tend to like ramble to a thing, but I'll do my best to be concise. Yeah, and I'm grateful always for the opportunity to like be checked or like to adjust, like, ouch, oops, let me know, like I think we're part of an anti-racist practice is like, Mariam Kaba says, like fumbling towards repair. There's no way we do this without tripping over ourselves, right? So grateful for the opportunity to be like, to grow and for instruction from community. But I love this question because I think maybe my first inclination is to really feel into the experience of what an anti-racist arts organization is not. Unfortunately, I think so much of my without even realizing it, it was only, I think, when I committed myself to really deep inquiry in my own personal arts practice, again, like reconciling anti-Black racism and internalized white supremacy in myself, that I started even to notice how far back my own interactions with arts institutions were like deeply imbued with white supremacy culture. Whether it was accessibility, financial resource, curation, curriculum and content, so much. I noticed that I forged a path, which was a really narrow way, through a lot of, where there was a lot of resource. And I'm grateful for the arts exposure and opportunities that I had from, my early childhood education through and beyond college. Still, there were so many barriers, and also just cultures or atmospheres that made it, I was like, why is it hard for me to breathe here? It was only when I was like really actively and deeply engaged in anti-racist work, and kind of untethering myself from white supremacist structures, that I felt myself being able to breathe, and then actively seeking out those spaces where I felt like that was more possible. So I would just name that it came from a place of feeling like I was in a narrow way, and like looking for and toward expansion. Anyhow, I think something I might start with, in terms of like what it feels like, I think, is an organization that's really focused on process instead of product, which is something that's actually really new to me. Not just in terms of like art creation, but also removing any impediments or barriers that would keep folks who are like kind of living in different identities from really like pressing their own edges, as performers, as facilitators or instructors, as directors in leadership positions, right? That the focus isn't on like what we're creating and whether or not it's checking boxes, but do you have all the tools and resources you need to be able to potentiate what's inside your head? I love to be a yes person, and sometimes to a fault. But to me, it's like, how do we make sure that you trust that you can share what's on your heart or your mind, that like your vision will be received without any kind of like limitations that don't need to impede you, that whatever resources maybe you are afraid to ask for because of the kind of shared learned behavior we have, you can tap me for, and that if the venue or the infrastructure we have in place isn't serving, how do we be accountable to that, right? Like what happens also, I feel like process includes debrief, includes failing and failing better, like acknowledging when it's not enough, which I think can be really uncomfortable for organizations. And I know, especially at GRP, we are, I think this, a language that I like to land with is like, notice who's with you, notice who's not. Maybe I've said it already, like what, how much attention are we giving? How much are we investing in those inhibitors to like an equitable space? Yeah. So I think that being focused on process in all of the senses of the word, and also celebrating rest and joy, really, truly, not for nothing, not saying, yeah, we want you to not, like self-care as a buzzword. I think you were mentioning buzzwords, Britt, but like, what does it mean when it gets ugly and I'm tired and, like broken down from programming, to like stop and reassess and say, we've got to make this sustainable, to show up for the ways that, we're built into these systems that are kind of designed as a reflection of capitalism, like really meant to grind us down. How can we reconcile that and choose each other over industry, over production, over like, giving the appearance of like good art, and actually like choose one another. And I think those commitments have a lot of different articulations. But I'll pause for now because I've been doing a lot of talking.
That's lovely. I don't know about y'all, but I can feel what you're talking about, like celebration, being here for each other. Yeah, like it feels different. Lanish, do you wanna jump in?
Yeah, everything that Sam said. And also, I think there is, at the base of it, and Kristal was kind of saying in their intro, like for me, the base of anti-racism is like, anti-racism is like an action verb term. Like it's a thing that you have to be doing in order for it to work. Because it's a constant, like it is constantly going against what we have been taught in like white centered culture. It's a continuing to uncenter whiteness. So it's action. Anti-racism is action. So an organization that's an anti-racist organization is like always working on anti-racism until we get to some utopia where whiteness is no longer centered. So I think that is it. And I think representation also is a huge tenet of it for me, because you can't be anti-racist and work towards being an anti-racist organization without having a diverse group within your organization. And then like next to that is then how are you then reaching a diverse set of people with what you are doing and making sure that you're doing the work. Again, this is it's an actionable, it's a constant thing, doing the work to make sure that you're reaching the people that you are intending to reach to be an anti-racist organization. And so it's representation, it's adjusting the concepts that we've accepted for the concept of professionalism. That's a big thing. The concept of professionalism is so like, it's very white centered. It is, especially if you look at something just as simple as hair, right? That is the most simple, like hairstyles that are considered professional are generally hairstyles that sometimes people of color can't even make their hair do. So how is it possible that something is professional that is unachievable by someone in their natural state, right? So something like that, looking at professionalism when it comes to people in the organization, when it comes to what you accept or expect from the people that you're serving also, as far as like, you know, being for me as a theater person, like what that means of what you expect from like proper theater goers, which is part of the reason we created Theater in the X, because like part of accessibility is comfortability, and that comes from what people assume you need to be, dress, or have if you're going to the theater. And yeah, and bringing in, as Sam was saying, accessibility is another thing. Like, oh, like anti-racism is basically like it's like the top layer that will then go into differently abled people, that will go into different gender representations, that like it just keeps going until we have like censored everyone. So I think that's the thing too, looking at accessibility and how that looks versus in the anti-racism lens, but also just in a general people lens. And like, how can you make your organization be the best representative in itself and for the people that you're bringing in?
Awesome. Thanks, Lanesh. Yeah, Kristal.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that representation, like I think anti-racist practice is like reevaluating the values that you have as an organization, because as a Latino organization, we could very easily center whiteness. You know, you could totally have like, you know, most of the films are like white Latinos, but we don't do that. You know, other organizations probably do that and still think that they're doing, you know, anti-racist work, but truthfully, it's still white supremacy. So I think it's evaluating like your privilege and knowing that you with your privilege have the ability to provide a resource for someone. Like that's kind of the way that I see my role, is that I'm providing resources to communities that, you know, have never had those resources. And so always evaluating my own privilege with the people that I'm working with or trying to serve, I think is so important. And I would also say that something that I've really been trying to push against, especially in film, is like this scarcity mindset that like, you know, there's only so much grants that could go around. There's only so many like, you know, slots in a film festival, like really reevaluating that, because some people will say, oh, because we have so few spots, we should give it to the people that are more quote unquote experienced, which could be, you know, the people that have, you know, really benefited from white supremacy and from their privilege. And so for me, I always think about things as like, it's not scarce. Like I'm actually providing someone with a really amazing opportunity to show at this festival, to have access to this screening, whatever. Like you're actually giving them an opportunity that I think is like a beautiful thing. Like, I just think it's like centering like the beauty and the grace and like the fact that it's good to help people, even if they don't have the experience, because they will eventually get to that point. Like you're helping build that bridge compared to, funding the same people that you've always funded and stuff like that. But I would say that, in order to continue to practice anti-racism, I also think that there needs to be some changes with the grants and the grant funding process, because, those processes don't really center anti-racism. You actually have to like write potentially a new grant to make a new program or like do different work from what you're already doing in order to sustain your organization. And that is just so, it causes burnout. It causes, it's like you have to keep proving yourself in order to get this money. And I don't think that really supports the anti-racist practices that we're trying to have as an organization. So I think it's also important to, think about that in terms of how funding is working for nonprofits. I'm probably, going way ahead in the talks right now.
No,
I'm just
it makes sense. I mean, you all are naming the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so hard to be like, give people opportunities when a funder is here, like you have to do this one specific thing that is really restricting you and your ability to best serve your community. So, yeah.
Yeah. Sam, did you want to add to that?
Woo, put me in, coach. Yes. I love that. Kristal, thank you so much for naming that. I've been thinking a lot about this reality that like, even now, something I wanted to name is that like anti-racist work is not an insurance policy. It's not DEI. It's not, it isn't like I'm doing this, which absolves me from my guilt, which absolves me from processing, which absolves me from making any other necessary changes. It's actually like staring down the realities of resource and privilege, even the concept of how we assign value, and turning those on their head, because any hoop we have to jump through, any process, even the structure of festival or venue, all of it has been, there are layers on top of layers of infrastructure that is bound to racism, is bound to white supremacy culture, is bound to capitalism, these systems and structures, again, where we are, where we choose industry, profit, product over one another. And so I couldn't agree more that like there isn't a conversation around anti-racist work without, oh, it's really overwhelming, like that it's everywhere we look. And so, I think that the sweet spot is then balancing what is the quality of care that we have to imbue with our work, to be gentle enough with ourselves, to trust ourselves enough, to build relationships, to receive and offer critical feedback, so that we can that's Saka. He's got a lot to say. Thank you, Britt, for inviting our whole selves to this conversation. He's been really quiet to this point. Saka also appreciates anti-racist work. What is it that like the quality of care that allows us to resource each other, to nourish each other, to support one another, so that this like the overwhelming amount of work, we either can dismantle it and make those changes over time, or I feel like aspirationally we opt out of those structures and start building these worlds that we want. Right? The leadership that we have are the ones who are like, what we need? What's got to happen during this pandemic? I'm looking at you, Lanish and Kristal, because you're both those inventors, right? You're building something that's, we're not even talking about dismantling the master's house, right? We're building our own spaces. We're not even walking through the door in that sense. It's like time to build our own proscenium, what lives in the those spaces we want to be the architect of. So, yeah.
And I want to go back to both privilege and experience. And like experience is another one of those things that is a bit subjective, in that again, it's like it's tied to privilege, right? Because you graduate from a 4-year college with a degree in a thing, but maybe have not done that thing at all. And someone else has done that thing for 8 years, but doesn't have a credential to go with it. And like changing how we think about experience, because that's another thing that at the base level, again, of representation and hiring, like looking at what your requirements are and what you're looking for from people and how that ties into privilege. Even like, again, coming from like the theater world, like the concept of printing, especially right now, printing and bringing a headshot and resume to something, to an audition, and like the concept of unprofessional, of not having been able to print a photo and a resume, where you can take it digitally. It's probably easier to have it digitally, and like holding on to things like that have been tenets of professionalism that aren't necessary and are tied to that person's ability to get to a Staples before they go to the audition, to have the money to print something at Staples before they come to the audition. All of these things. So it's like, again, looking at part of the anti-racism work is examining experience and examining what you might be looking for from people that is connected to a privilege that you might not even think of. You have a printer in your home, it's easy for you, right? But that might not be the case for others. And for like interviewing and auditioning, like allowing people to maybe submit materials in video versus in writing, if that is a better medium for them, all of those things, making it easier and more accessible to get the more diverse set of people that you want for what you're trying to do, because thank you because the delivery, because that might be the stopping point where it's like, we can't find diverse candidates. And it's like, but what about your process is turning away people who might be great for the position but don't exactly fit into the box that you're expecting?
And to add on to that, I would say hiring people of color and like diverse people doesn't make you anti-racist as an organization, because you're probably like, you could be the most toxic, like racist environment, and hiring like one person of color won't change that. It's really about, processing what's happening on every level, like how people talk to each other, how people email one another, how people get a task done, what the values are in terms of completion and completing whatever your mission is. Like it's at the core of what you are as an organization. And if you don't center that like healing and accepting like different voices and different perspectives, like from the beginning for every single decision, then it's inherently like a racist organization. Hiring one person of color will just put them in a really toxic environment that will affect them, and they will also be the person handling all of the issues. Like they will, like, to have that one person of color who then calls out and like has to deal with all the racism and then try and fix that, like they're the ones fixing the issues that keep being put on them. It's not good at all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anything else y'all want to keep going on that topic? Thank you. This was like that conversation was perfect. And I know there have been a few questions tossed in the chat box, but we will get to questions at the end. All right. So we're just gonna keep moving because I think the flow is just going really well, and you all took it from like the like tiny kernels of how like one interaction feels to like the big expansiveness of what's possible in the world and all the systems that we're working against. So I appreciate all the perspectives you brought to unpacking the notion of anti-racism within organizations and the world, right? It's not just our entities, it's everything. So the next question is, how do the organizations you work with embody these values and lenses? So we heard a few things come up, but if you feel comfortable sort of naming the different practices that you've employed at your organizations, I think that'll help sort of bring something tangible to like, this is what we do. This is like what it looks like. These are the things we put into place to make sure we're continuously doing this work, and how that looks. Lanice, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. I'll try to go hat by hat. Well, some of the hats, so for Theater Latinx, of course, and I also forgot to mention that I'm also on the steering committee for the Black Theater Alliance of Philadelphia. So for those two, and not that, and I should preface that by saying, like, it shouldn't be just a given that all Black organizations are by nature anti-racist, because that's also not the case. So I won't even like lead with that assumption. But our creation for both of those entities were in response to the not anti-racism work of the mainstream theater organizations in the city. And so creating those spaces where we are allowing Black artists to be prioritized is part of it. And then like taking that to the next step of, for example, we have a BTAP, Black Theater Alliance in Philadelphia has an event tonight, an Artist Hill workshop. And so with that, it's providing travel stipends, it's providing a meal, it's making sure that people's accessibility needs are met. Like going a step above, like, this is a thing for Black people. Like, but it also is like the same tenets are in there. It's like, what is the actionable things that can be done to provide the space for those people? And how do we want to offer a great workshop for artists? How can we make that the easiest for them as possible to be able to participate in that? And then with Theater Latinx, like things like providing childcare at rehearsal and shows. Like, again, like I was saying before, it's like the anti-racism just like bleeds into all of the other things and making all of the people be able to participate. So what does it look like to make sure that parents can be in our shows? And then coming into Theater Philadelphia, which is an umbrella organization. So we are to represent all of the theater in the region, and coming in with an eye to make sure that we were doing that. How does that look like? And it's more work. If I am trying to compile like some highlight of something, like it would be so easy to go off like top 5 in my brain of the mainstream theaters. And it's like, I'm usually with like a little piece of scratch paper, and I'm making sure that there is representation across race, across genders, across sizes of companies, across locations of theater companies, Center City versus West Philly versus out in the suburbs. And it is that like, it's actionable. It's constant work of thinking about representation and a constant trying to bring the barriers down. It's like, what can we do even more to bring barriers down? It's like, we didn't have childcare for Theater Latinx in the beginning. And it was like, okay, that's a thing that people will need to be able to participate. Okay, we can have childcare. Like bringing down barriers continually. We're having a workshop series, like people can't get here, or they would have to take an Uber or whatever. How can we provide that for them to get them there? So I think it is just being a part of a constant thinking, even in like the completely Black organizations that I'm a part of, there's other barriers, and how are we breaking them down? Like always thinking about that.
Thanks. Kristal, you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say that I've really tried a lot in my work to really see like the landscape, kind of like what Lanice was saying, like you have to look at the landscape and see what's missing, but also what examples are out there and how, like, what are they doing right or wrong, right? Because there's absolutely a way that a Latino organization could not center, diversity. It's very easy. You could just turn on Telemundo, like today, right now, So I think it's really like making it very clear what you're not trying to be. I think that's been really helpful. And then recognizing that it's going to take a while to be where we want to be at. Because, the reality is like tomorrow we can't, provide subtitles for all of our films. Like, it's just, there's certain things that you can't always get done now, but making a plan to figure out how in 3 years, in 2 years, in 1 year, how can you get to that point? Because the reality is that this anti-racism is a process. You'll have to keep doing it. And so I think it's really important, especially if you're in like, environments that are particularly like, I would say like Latino film festivals and like Asian American film festivals and like Black film festivals historically get less funding. So when you're in an organization that centers these perspectives, you will get less funding because that's how the funding system is made. It's racist, like truthfully, just call it what it is. And so when you're in these organizations, change takes a little bit longer. Like when I started out, we were 3 days and it took 3 years to get to the point that we're like 8 days long. And we have like, tripled the amount of films that we've accepted. So, to make these changes, it's going to take some time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take money, and it's going to take people. And so really like mapping things out about like what you want to see in the future is really helpful, because that really helps you like frame like what is the issue that we're dealing with, and then how do we get to the point where that issue is addressed. And it could be that it's something super simple to answer, like how do we make our website more accessible? Well, an easy way is to just like add image descriptions for each image. So like, how long is that going to take to do it for every single image on our website? Like, I really want to do that for the FLAC website, but we have hundreds of images because we have a lot of films, So I think it's really important to just like map out the process, like dream big and allow the dream to happen, and then map it out, because these things are going to take time. I think it's really important.
Thank you. Sam, what do you want to add?
Ooh, my internet just got like a little glitchy, and my little dog is like threatening to bark over here. So I'm like, hypervigilant.
You're great.
And I'm so grateful to both of you for underlying the like material, like almost like the places that like the ways that like small transactional moments bar full participation from beloved community as like a simple thing. That you can put it in a budget, you can operationalize it. It's something that you can name as you're doing that, what a huge impact it has. Like, we don't offer programming what I mean to say is all of our programming has childcare as a standard offering for youth participants, for volunteers, for like our like staff, our board, because it doesn't matter if it's like if you are a caregiver or you are supporting you're a young person supporting your caregiver, and your job is to take care of your siblings after school, or like your mutual aid practice is making sure that your next door neighbor can get to work, and so you're taking care of their kid today. Like, it doesn't matter what the story is. It's like, how can we bring you into this practice? That's an easy barrier to eliminate and something we can fund. We always provide meals. We always provide travel stipends, and resources to people. And for the first time, and not for the first time, I think, but just like building on a practice of we're pulling apart the language of volunteer, recognizing that if we want to have a culture and community that is accessible, we can't expect the people we say we're prioritizing, which are queer and trans BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color, to offer their labor for free. Like the identities that we say we're valuing, we're immediately at odds if we're asking them to show up for nothing. So like, what does it mean infrastructurally to dismantle that? And that's our mandate. It's not even a question. It's not a suggestion. It's not something that we hope for. It's the work. And so, yeah, I feel like just naming all of those layers and limitations. Kristal, your point of time with the image captions, it's like, how do we move then at the speed of care and at the speed of, and in so many ways we're meeting ourselves in the place where we want to do more and do better. And so I feel like the backlog of images that for me, like as I'm thinking, I'm like, the ones that don't have image captions, how do we not let that be debilitating? And also, how do we reprioritize work so that we're moving at the speed of care and at the speed of trust? I just want to name, I think, conversations around, I'm looking at the books that are like above my head and the poems that are above my head. I have a couple bookshelves that like literally frame in this time of pandemic my aspirations for my work. So I'm looking at care work right now, and dreaming disability justice. And it's like, oh, right, when our organization, like when we meet the aspiration that everyone can participate, it's everyone can participate. You know, when all of us are all the way free, all of us are all the way free. And so how do we focus on that instead of being, it's a challenge because it can feel overwhelming, but I think that's why, the more we have awareness around those barriers, and we can just, even when it does become like when it is more transactional in nature or structural, that feels easier to do. It's like, oh, right, we just add this money to the budget, end of discussion, and I think the hard work is a little more tricky, where it's like, right, anti-racist training is that with like community, with colleagues and co-conspirators in Philadelphia, is a mandate for the programming that we're going to offer for anyone who's participating on our board. We're going to, like, if we are prioritizing these identities, we're also prioritizing their well-being so they can participate. I think that there's something, the language I think that you use when posing the question is embodiment. It's like, how do these tenets and values live, and not only live inside the work, but how do they animate the work, right? How do they become the drivers and the motivators for what our programming looks like, for what our interactions with one another look like? And I think that's kind of the shift, again, from like, this is a liability policy to this is the world that we want. And so I think that's been the shift that I in my own life as an individual person, and also like gratefully that GRP, I think we maybe avoid naming ourselves as an anti-racist organization because we are deeply committed to anti-racist work, which is a forever process and is never done. So that point that you made earlier, Lanish, of like, it's not a label we would give ourselves as much as like a deep commitment, and a willingness to like be wrong, and also to continually be working on ourselves at the speed of care and at the speed of trust.
Thank you. And something that I didn't hear from y'all that is a personal like thing that I value about a lot of the different groups that you all work in is organizational structure. Because of the nonprofit industrial complex, and because of like the horrible philanthropic complex that Kristal, you were talking about earlier, that keeps these things in place. Like, you all work in organizations with alternative organizing structures, right? Which hopefully are becoming the like more typical. So does anyone want to talk about your organizational structures of different groups that you're working in, and how those are, part of building anti-racist organizations?
Yeah, I think for us, like Theater Latinx, we have titles. The founders have titles because grant applications want to know the titles of what our titles are, right? It's a very like, it's not hierarchical. It's really like the three of us founded the company, the three of us, we make decisions together. We allow other people to make decisions based on their position and how they're working with us. It is, yeah, it's a fluid process. And I think that is the collective model, which is similar to BTAP as well, where it's like, there is a group of us, we named ourselves the steering committee, again, because funders want to know, what are you people that are doing things? So, okay, we're a steering committee for the sake of this grant application. But again, I think communal leadership structures also help with having anti-racist organization, having an organization that can serve the needs of more people, because then you have a collective, a community that can express how decisions affect them from the place that they're coming from. And I think that is very important, because when you do have a more hierarchical structure, there is the fear of going a level up and saying, you know, expressing your needs or expressing, you know, any sort of kind of negative feelings on how things are going. And it just works like when people feel like they are comfortable enough to express what they need, it also opens them up to think more, being able to represent the different groups and types of people that they represent. So they can both speak for their own personal needs as well for communities that they represent, which is going to give you more perspectives, like things that you might have not thought about at all as far as, you know, what their needs might be out there. So yeah, I'm very much into like communal and committee type of leadership structure. Of course, there has to be, you know, there has to be someone who is like the buck stops here kind of thing, but only in a situation where it's like completely impossible to come to a consensus or something.
I would maybe hop in here, and thanks, Lanish, for that. I am hearing you on the like, this is what the funner needs to hear, so this is my title today. You know, like the difference between the name tag and the hat you wear and the ladder you're running up and down is like the kind of acrobatics I think we have to do. Just naming that, like the amount of work and labor that goes into justifying ourselves is inherently racist, and it's so infuriating. So just acknowledging anybody on this call who has had to navigate that, you know, like the personas we have to map onto ourselves in order to be considered like viable in a funding framing is something like just infuriating. And yeah, I look forward to leveraging our collective thought partnership to coming up with a new strategy. You know, like, let's do it. Put it on the don't float away list. I was just gonna say, and it's like a celebration point, but also a pain point, is that yeah, GRP has a co-directorship. We have a 3-director leadership model. And we're also really grateful for the working board that we have for our board members who are like deeply committed on a programmatic day-to-day level. We have an operations committee that is like, has supported us through a lot of like really hard infrastructural questions that are like, okay, we say on paper, this is who we are, but like, we're actually just that in name and maybe like feeling under supported. Like, what does it mean for us to build together the structure that where we are going to feel not only like, that we can support one another, but that creates a kind of like equity and balance, you know, is something that I think is really challenging. Just to name that, we are in this really precarious position. I've been thinking a lot about precarity in this like Zoom world that we're in, where we know we want something different. We know that like structurally we crave new models, and we have to experiment and play to get to them. So thank goodness that we're artists, right? That we are creators and that we're solutionary and adaptable. Our work is sussing out and trying on that we're willing to do that. And also that the impacts, because of the realities of funding, because of the realities of racism, sexism, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, whatever we're dealing with, the impact of that when the structure is fragile is also that much more palpable. And so I think like the balance of being courageous and vulnerable and you know, kind of guinea pigging ourselves into these structures that we know we want to believe in, and then also feeling the weight when the experiment doesn't necessarily work, or it's not as sound as we thought it was, or we're fighting each other's egos because we are feeling insecure in the structure. Like that's all real too, because there's so much more on the line when the leadership and the art practice and the community are so close, right? I feel like that's in some ways, like that's the difference between organizations that have like a, you know, our payroll taxes pale in comparison to the Kimmel Center, right? Like their general operating, or like rather our general operating budget pales in comparison to the payroll taxes of the Kimmel. Like we are a drop in the bucket. The brackets are outrageous. Like I can't believe that there's like, it's just, it feels like this, you know, beanstalk to the clouds of like how much money someone else can ask for. You know, I just, and that mind body separation of like administration on that level versus like community, and people who are feeling the impacts day to day, like we you know,
Thank you. There's a lot there. I appreciate that. Yeah, Kristal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that, capitalism and the form of like a hierarchy in work is like directly linked to slavery. Like, so it's like racist from the beginning. Like you can listen to the 1619 Project, the New York Times. They have like an amazing podcast. You can listen to it. You literally don't have to read it, I'm pretty sure you could also read it, but it's just like, it's really good. And each episode is like, I would say like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So you can just like listen to it when you're driving or where you're walking around or something. But it just like listening to it, I was just like, wow, I can't believe that like this is, it makes sense when you listen to it. Just the way that we are like forced to create products or to give like a service. It's just like with absolutely no, value given towards our health physically and mentally, that all just it's kind of mind-blowing that we're still allowing that. Okay, so pretty much it's like the fact that during slavery, like there were people that managed other people, right? There were people that managed like enslaved people. And then there were people that managed those people and then people that managed those people. And at the very top was like the slave, like owner, like the main like plantation owner. And the fact that like that main person forced other people to be more productive. So within like just like a decade, like the amount of production of cotton, like it just like was it like triple. It was so much. I would say listen to it because I'm not obviously doing justice, but I would just say like the fact that, there is no way to the top and the people closest to the work aren't being valued, aren't being like allowed to voice their opinion, to make change, to like to do things differently. I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind is like, really like the people that are going to be doing the labor should have just as much say, if not more, like significantly more than the people that are leading the thing. So board members, like a board should not be dictating the work of an organization if they will not do the work. I think that that's something that's so important, because they dictate sometimes like wages. Like it's like crazy. Like they dictate wages, they dictate what grants you're going to apply to, what programs you're going to do, and they don't do the labor. And they like think that it's one way, but it's actually like a completely different way when you get to the ground level. And that ends up affecting the workers significantly, because now they have to try and produce what the person at the top wants you to produce. That is going to be detrimental to you as a person, because it's just not possible. And I would say, like, in starting Presente Media, we started it because, in this system, you kind of have to be part of an organization to be taken seriously. Like as individual filmmakers, like it's impossible. It's like so hard to get money to fund your film. But if you're part of a group, it's easier a little bit to get money. Like it's just, once you're an organization, like your access increases compared to being an individual, which is why I think like collective organizing is so important. Because working together, you really, like when you have a mass of people, that really makes a change compared to one person trying to make change. You can try, but it's like really difficult when you're alone. And I think like working together, of course, presents challenges, but I think like it's provided more opportunities that we would have just never had. And the reality is that we're the ones doing all the labor, and we get to dictate what the labor looks like, and who will be doing what, and what everyone's expertise is. So in that, we are centering really like what we can provide to a community, rather than like, continuing to think about things as like, you just have to do it because of the grant, like I'm really like, I just think the mindset, like the scarcity mindset thing is just really, I think, something at the key, because for me, like capitalism and racism is really based in this idea of like the finite. There's like a finite amount of resources, and that's why people occupy other countries and like try to take everyone's resources, is because of this idea of everything is finite, compared to indigenous thinking, which is more like everything is infinite. Like we can provide if we just continue to grow food and, I don't know, use like the air and the sun to provide our power. So I think really like centering the people that will be closest to the work is important. I think I also lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, super helpful. Yeah, Sam.
Oh no, I just wanted to appreciate that, Kristal. I feel like you're so on point, not losing your train of thought. You had me like roped in the whole time, and I feel so grateful for that. I also just wanted to say, one of the major things that we do in this, back to this question of like embodying anti-racist work, is constantly leveraging our position inside the nonprofit industrial complex, like to the benefit of the community members who we want to prioritize. I think is a big deal. Like where we can be like a community partner, where we can like write a grant in common with someone, where like we can build out a project that someone has interest in getting off the ground, but maybe not the resource. Like our teaching artists, our young people who like want to potentially, I think our participants become our like instrument instructors and band coaches, and roadies become our board members, become our aspirationally, I'm looking forward to being rendered obsolete by a 9-year-old, who becomes the director. Like I really, 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 like the best thing that could happen is like, if and when I transition away from GRP, that position is taken up by a person who's come through our programs. Like that's it, right? That it's not, there's no aging out, right? That there's no, these notions of like service, is hierarchical or becomes like helping, but rather like we center one another, we choose one another. And that structurally, rather than like going through a, you like get on a little conveyor belt and you write some songs and feel good, and then like you're 18 and what happens. Rather, we are like choosing each other and like and grow and just nurturing community, right? I don't ever want our programming to be separate from Philadelphia, right? Like as a, or to feel like isolated as a program, but rather like we're folding ourselves back into one another, and like we become a longer form resource, that someone knows that it's like, yeah, money is dumb, but you know, a 501c3, if that's status, if we can leverage that, so you do have a platform, and so that you have a thought partner, and so that you have, you know, easier access to material resource, like that's why we're here. There's no way to participate in it and have that awareness without applying ourselves then again towards, you know, that like deconstruction and repurposing materials to build something that we want. Yeah.
Thanks. Anything more on that, Kristal or Lanish, before we keep going? No? All right, so I am gonna propose that we take a 5-minute bio break. And I'm going to pause. Recording is now in progress. All right, so this question is, what are some of the biggest challenges your organization has experienced when it comes to building and sustaining anti-racist organizations? What have you bonked into? Who wants to go first?
I can jump in. I think, and this might be even for me, like personally in doing this work, is like sitting, figuring out, naming and understanding it, and like being able to translate things. Like I've been really, really fortunate in my kind of arts administration life, and really my performing life also, like being at the Painted Bride, having my own organizations. Like I've had a privilege to be in spaces that have been anti-racist by nature before anti-racism was, you know, buzzword. So being able to really examine like what that looks like, what that feels like, what are the tenets that made those spaces that way. And then taking the time to, again, it's actionable. So it's like a continual thing, looking for those places where barriers can be broken down. Even representation, like the thing about representation is that it does take more work, because the people that you will have the most easy access to bring into your fold are probably going to be very monolithic. And that can be in any way. That might be just like, you know, not having a representation in demographics, like that could be geography, like any of those things. Like there really is work that goes into fulfilling being representative. So that's a thing that's always just like kind of like always looking to bring down barriers, like always looking to figure out what group you aren't representing. And that's like just a constant thing, and not falling into comfortability of, you know, we have a majority people of color, or we're all Black, so we've done it, right? Like there's always another step. And so just continuing to do that work, even though it absolutely, like it's work, there's definitely additional work when you're being intentional about being anti-racist.
Thanks, Lanish. Kristal, you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say for the work that I do that centers Latinidad, I would say one of the biggest obstacles is not being taken as a token. Like our organizations are just tokenized, like, oh, there's like the one Latino thing. You know, it's kind of like Hispanic Heritage Month, which starts on the 15th. I'm just like, you know, every time Hispanic Heritage Month comes up, like myself and all my Latinx friends are tokenized in some way. Like people finally are like, oh yeah, Latinos exist. And people will write like the 1 or 2 Latino articles during the month, and that's it. And they'll say, you know, we did our work in terms of representation. And that ends up affecting many things. It affects the funding that we're able to get, the access that we're able to get to larger resources, aside from money. access to like even like industry leaders, even credibility when you're trying to talk to someone else. Oh, you work for that Latino thing that's based in Philly. It's, you know, it's not even New York or LA, honey, you know, like that sort of sentiments, you know, and the fact that you constantly have to prove yourself. Like you're just never, like your expertise isn't valued as expertise when it very clearly is. And yeah, I would say that those are the hard parts about working in like a Latino organization, trying to break down the racist sentiments in film and journalism.
Thanks, Kristal. Yeah, Sam. It is icky, isn't it?
Blah. I just hearing all of that, like I feel yous are really coming up for me. Like, this notion of legitimacy is such an infuriating one. And I think about how much magical work and insight and creativity has been like lost to this century because we are worried about legitimacy and worried about cred and worried about, you know, what's the word? This sort of positionality is just, it's really hard. It's something that I also really love about Philadelphia is that there is this kind of a different way of seeing and connecting to one another. That's like possible in a practice that I really love. I like it. I'm like, I want to encourage us to lean into it more as part of our identity as like a culture creator as a city. New York, LA. Just saying.
Are you gonna want me to cut that out of the YouTube thing?
Maybe. I don't know. I know I have peers who are gonna be coming for me like, what did you say? But also leave Philly alone / Philly's the greatest. It's all in the mix. A couple of things that come to mind. Firstly, I would say with GRP in particular, yeah, come through in the chat with these like Philly affirmations, which are also like whatever everybody else. I just think we deserve that. We need that. I love you, Philadelphia. I'm thinking about one of the challenges that's also a really rich growing edge that I think like has a lot of implications for a city in a long form. When I think about like locating Girls Rock Philly in Philly, is the idea that the space between an organization's founding and founders and where we are presently, and thinking about like how GRP in particular, like the aspiration for a leadership team of color and specifically prioritizing Black and Brown and Indigenous, and broader communities of marginalized identities and trans community members and gender expansive community members, like that is all evolved from like a growing awareness about what it actually means to create spaces that are empowering, and like what we believe the magic of music as a transformative force really means. Like, and so I think a real challenge is like, that I think I'm grateful for the ways that Girls Rock Philly's community on the whole has really risen to the challenge of addressing an organization that was founded in 1996, 97. That was like, oh no, I'm sorry, not 90s, 2006. It was predominantly white, was actually almost, I think, exclusively white. And then I'm like how that shifted over the course of the last 15 years. Thinking about how feminism in particular and like Riot Girl and like a lot of the language that we talk about inside music, like made by women and girls, has been really leveraged violently, not just against different gender minorities, but like we scale that also to, it's there's just like thinking about whiteness and specifically white feminism and how we can meet ourselves where we are, acknowledge history, honor our grief and pain, recognize the limitations, and know like where we are is like we've grown to this place and continue to choose that by actively working like to heal and reconcile legacies of harm, known or unknown, conscious or unconscious. And so I think there's just there has to be a mandate and a deep commitment from organizations that have like white leadership or have had white leadership, that recognize that there are gaps in who they are serving to like get right in a good way with the people that we claim to center. And also, whether or not you claim to center specific identities or marginalized identities, like that work still has to happen. And so I think like actually committing to that, but in a tangible way that we can communicate, that we can track, that's achievable, that's quantifiable or measurable, but is also an ethos, I think is really important, and extremely difficult. And I say that as a person who's like, I'm a Black mixed race person and like recognize the privileges and the places that like white supremacy culture occupies in me, and like the ways that I had easier access to my position than people who maybe people who are equally more qualified, because I'm like a light-skinned, like femme presenting Black person, right? Like, and just naming that out loud is something that becomes really empowering. But if we're not talking about that, if we're not seeing that, what are we doing, really? So it's just something, and I feel really grateful for the community that we're in, because like for the most part, people are ready to do the work. And when they're not, the rest of the community has my back when I'm like, here's a boundary, cool. I also would just want to name something that's like really challenging has been the labor of explaining or articulating to funders and to broader community what anti-racist work means and why it needs to be resourced, why we need to get paid more money for fewer hours, why we need resources to take care of ourselves as part of our jobs, why we want to demand maternity leave or parental leave, excuse me, that like hasn't existed before, even though we don't know, like no one in our workplace is in that position yet, but we are imagining for a world where that is necessary, right? Why giving critical feedback to funders, like that amount of that labor is vital, and it is extremely taxing. And so I think that when you are operating at that, I feel like the vector of arts programming and social identity as like reclaiming that to create new work and to push and transcend boundaries is just like, I feel like we're moving things, but it's a hard push. It's a lot, it's exhausting. And I think it's also, in one sense, it's like happening everywhere. Like there's no difference between me like trying to book gigs in Asheville, North Carolina right now. They're like, I need to be out of doors. I need to be paid more than you would normally consider. Like I gotta know who else is on the bill, because I don't want to deal with gear bros, is no different than we're organizing this action for ACT UP. It needs to be in this location because it has to be physically accessible. Like I'm not going to mince my words with these people in positions of power in the city, is no different than, how do we make sure that this 9-year-old gets drumsticks in their hand? And, I will do the legwork of articulating that to a funder somewhere. It's the same challenge everywhere. But illuminating for someone else who is blissfully unaware of the obstacle course that we are navigating is very challenging. And so kudos to all the people who are doing it, and also to normalizing speaking out loud about it, because change doesn't happen because we like suddenly some, CEO or director of an organization, like it recognizes that they have work to do. It's because a handful of really committed people chose each other over those folks and like made a lot of noise, and, everybody else had to get in line eventually. I'm rambling a little, but that's where I'm at.
No, I think you're not at all. It's all, it's brilliant. And like, I'm finding my mind is like having a hard time keeping up with the depth of the concepts that you're talking about. Like in each turn of phrase, it's like, there's so much to unpack within all of that stuff. It's super helpful. And also like, let's keep going with this notion of not not mincing words, like what is some advice you would give to a historically white-led and white-centered organization that wants to become anti-racist? And like, this is the conversation right now. And so there are things that like keep being said. And so we can keep repeating them. And if there's something like punchier that you feel like they need to hear, feel free to put that out. So I'm just going to open it up and say, who wants to go first? Because I also don't want to put anyone on the spot for this one.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Lanish.
It's okay. It's hard. This is the thing. And it's funny because I had this conversation like more than a year ago now to theater people. And it was basically like, you can't be afraid to lose people. You can't be afraid to lose in general, which is like super scary, right? It's like, especially right now, we're in a pandemic, like most of us are barely hanging on. Within theater, like we haven't been producing, like stuff's already hard. But to do this work, especially when it comes to like potential for losing audience members who aren't on board with where you are, like if your organization wants to go forward and be anti-racist and you have subscribers who are like, what's a land acknowledgement? Why do we need this? Like, you gotta be willing to lose them, which is very scary because, you know, everything with capitalism, money, it's needed, right? Like it is part of our life. It's no matter how much we, you know, don't like the system. But you have to, like, there's gonna be a risk there, but also I think looking at alternative ways, because the amount of people that you can potentially lose who aren't on board with who you are anymore, and then that's also fine. To lose people who aren't on, if your organization is ready to move forward and those people are not, then that has to be okay. Just like in your personal life, if you are ready to move forward and you've got a friend who isn't on board, you have to let them go, unfortunately, right? But looking at the potential for how many more people you can bring into the fold, the potential for doing things differently. Someone asked earlier about whether if we thought that concerts shouldn't charge for tickets, right? So like something like that, which is very based, it's capitalism based, it's need based. But the thing is, and I can't really speak to music, but I can definitely speak to theater when it comes to creating access, things like pay what you can ticketing, which theaters were doing even before the pandemic started. And the studies were showing that they were making more. Also a secret, not a secret to anyone who produces theater, but ticket sales don't cover the cost no matter what, right? So that's the secret. So the thing, when you acknowledge that and you release yourself from being tied to the ticket sales that are only covering 20% of the budget anyway, you think you're like, if you let it go, provide that access, and you can see more people that you're reaching, potentially people that will be big donors down the line. You'll see people stepping up who understand that pay what you can gives access to other people and they are able, so they will give you more. Like that is what the data and the numbers for pay what you can tell you, that what ends up happening is that you still will make what you made before or more, and you will be bringing in more people. So just looking at all of the areas that are just, we've accepted to be things that don't have to be, the ways that you can do things differently is really like the main thing, because there's a potential there. And then having anti-racism, again, it's an actionable, continual thing. So having anti-racism plans be a part of all of your plans, be a part of strategic planning, be like Kristal was saying, and also when Sam was saying it, as far as like image descriptions, like things like that, those are things that can be planned. You can plan to get funding for an intern who their job will be to listen to a podcast and do all those image descriptions all day. And you pay them for that, because that's also important. But just the planning of it, because there are very much actionable and plannable things in there. And there also is so much room to just try new things, think about things differently. Don't take anything that has been how the thing works to be what you have to do, because you don't.
Thank you. So good. Sam or Kristal?
I can add to what Lanish said because it was like perfect, but I would just say like maybe you're not the right person to lead the anti-racism. So maybe like hire someone for their time to give you the consultation, like hire a consultant, because clearly if you are in a racist organization that has been racist for years, you might not be the best person to lead that. And that's absolutely okay. And being okay with having someone else come in and explain things to you and be receptive and open to the change, and pay people well, right? Like, you know, pay your diverse people well. You know, if you're like a person of color, you bring in a lot in like cultural value, you bring in even language, different citizenship region, like you add so much more. Like I would say, like, I have a friend who is undocumented and was telling me like, you know, my identity is like so wide because I'm like immigrant, I'm undocumented, I'm queer, I'm person of color. And I was just like, wow, you're so right. And their experiences are vastly different. And even like having like needing citizenship in this country, like the amount of money that needs to go into you getting citizenship is a lot. Like there's actual barriers that people of color, like queer people, like people that may be immigrants have in this country that costs a lot of money. Like you have to think about like, you know, you need like an immigration lawyer, you need to like fill out your immigration papers every year. Like that's like thousands of dollars you have to pay yearly that your white counterpart may never have to pay. So you're like inherently making less than them just to live. So like you have to really like pay people of color and pay diverse people that are adding this extra value to your organization, because like our labor is inherently like adding more because we have this different level of understanding of things that we need to be compensated for that extra expertise, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Sam.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think about the sort of double dip. I think that people like, especially folks who are white, you know, like white identified, and also folks who maybe, I'm thinking also about like, yeah, like white cis heteronormativity. I don't want to get into word salad, but just the reality that like when your organization benefits from being able to describe diversity, and it like makes it easier for you to benefit, while like the people who are making that possible for you are like challenged by this, like the system that like this, it's a catwalk. And if you're standing on top because someone is standing underneath you, and part of that is like, look at all this cool work we're doing, aren't I awesome? Like, come on. Like it's time to acknowledge that like those resources that keep you on the couch, it's time to roll out the carpet, bring down like the fire ladder. I don't know what it is. I can't extend the metaphor further, but like acknowledge the difference, acknowledge the barrier, and make quantifiable, measurable, and significant shifts in the way that you allocate resources, in the way that you allocate power, in the way that you educate yourself, including paying people to do that. If there is going to be labor that like queer and trans and BIPOC folks, I'm sorry, I'm scaling this more broadly than race, but like those intersections are inextricable for me. Like if that work is necessary, then like you're going to have to shift the way that you allocate resources to it, like at the bare minimum. Like I would have a call or a mandate to any like organizations that are white led, directors or like senior level administrators, like contribute directly, maybe not to your own organization, but organizations that are minority led, that are minority operated, right? Like BIPOC organizations. There are resources and calculators that will help you determine the amount of resources based on your salary that you can monthly contribute back directly to creators in your community who deserve those things because it's what they're owed. And so I just like as a foundationally, I think that like people like white leadership and also white led organizations owe it to our liberation and to their like communities, to restructure how they're hanging on to resource and how they're redistributing it in their personal lives and in their organizations. And I would also say it's really hard to talk about anti-racist work and diversity, equity, inclusion as like the cute way that we try to talk about anti-racist work. That like your political education, and this is from Sonali Rashatoir, who's the fat sex therapist, an incredible human therapist, facilitator of hard conversations, and just badass. He says like your political education is only powerful to the point you're willing to cede power. It's not enough to come to this panel. Are you listening? Have you been waiting to like offer us your opinion in the form of a question the whole time, or have you actually listened to what these incredible people are offering you? You've taken the training, but like how are you embodying that? You say that it matters to you, but like what does mattering look like? So I think like the question that I have is, or maybe just to say like, get comfortable hearing that it's not enough. Like normalize the understanding that like we have a long way to go, and like we're going to be spending the rest of our lives acknowledging how much access, how much resource has been systematically and deliberately denied and stolen, actually like looted and plundered from community. Like that the work that you at your organization will have to do to reconcile that is like, it's not actually it's a mandate. It's not actually even the responsibility of the person in your organization that you want to support, or that like you feel guilty. It's like that's actually just what you owe a broader community. And I maybe say that to Philadelphia as like a majority Black city that's also the one of the poorest cities in the country. On paper, like it's because those resources have been systemically extracted from the communities who are making Philadelphia this like incredibly generative and like lucrative city. Like Philly's arts and creative scenes are extremely profitable, right? And nonprofits and private companies have been making bank at the expense of the creators who are the backbone of the community, who are then working double time to care for their families, to offer more of their labor, right? Like it's past time that we can pretend that we don't have the awareness around inequity. And it's past time that we can say that we don't know what to do, because there are so many tools and resources available to support your education. We're just in the moment now where you have to cede power and cede resources, and rethink the way that you're holding on to them, so that it can be sustainable. So I think unfortunately that's the advice, is like, you've been at the like white leadership and like fronted organizations, sorry, I'm throwing my phone, have been in this position of comfort and high visibility, strategically for centuries, at least in this country, right? Built on infrastructures of harm and oppression. So the only way to get right with that is to acknowledge how wrong it is. And I think there's plenty of supports to make that possible for you. But one thing you can do is contribute directly to the people who are reimagining new ways forward, buy into and invest in alternative structures that are, illuminating the path. Because like the work that Lanish and the work that Kristal and so many other organizers are doing in Philadelphia is the work where all of us are all the way free. And you can't get that twisted. Sorry for pontificating.
That was perfect. I think that's the perfect end point. I don't know that we need to go any further, because the collection of information was so good. Lanish, you unmuted, so I do want to open up that I welcome any additional.
Yeah, no, basically like coming off of that though, there are that resource sharing, like that is the main thing that PWIs can do. And it is not always anything grand. Like if you have a building, that right there is something that you can offer. I don't know if there are any theater organizations of color that have a building. Like that is one thing that you can very easily share. Connections to funders, sending over grant applications that you see. Like there are very simple ways to be able to spread what you receive just by way of you having functioned within the mainstream for so long. Easy things, very easy things.
Brilliant. Anything else, Lanish or Kristal or Sam, before we begin to close? Anything else that's like, you really gotta say? All right, if not, thank you all so much for your time and your energy and your wisdom and your labor and in being here and in being part of the movements and part of the work. I bow deeply to each of you and am so grateful for all of you. You're getting lots of love in the chat, and thank you all. And I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine for closing words.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I am beaming. I was on the brink of tears at one point because something Kristal was saying was so resonating. Representation is extremely important in the world of creativity and arts. And sometimes all we need is just space to facilitate the services and to show up and represent in the space. So thank you so very much. This was a fantastic way for us to kick off our fall workshop series. Thank you all again for your question, or thank you all for participating in the chat and for encouraging our panelists. Thank you, Britt, for leading such a wonderful conversation. Sorry, I'm like really